Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg.
So, in speaking to that, here's a video. Again, one of my favorite all-time videos. I tell the joke that the joke I like to tell is that Dylan Ratigan told the truth about the banking system on TV, and so now he has to do his news reports from a park. And I always point to this rant, even though, according to you, and we'll accept your word for it, that you did not get fired from MSNBC. You left at your own volition, and everyone was nice to you. But here's that rant. Here we go.
We owe $70 trillion.
Yeah?
I'll tell you, yeah. It's
okay, here we go.
I understand that, but you can't
to walk out a $4 trillion solution, which is basically just a way for the Democrats to avoid.
So this is, by the way, this is right when they were trying to fix the financial meltdown that had happened, and Barack Obama, famously, if you don't know, maybe it's not so famous, his entire cabinet was chosen. It was exposed that from an email from Citigroup. So that got exposed, that everyone Citigroup wanted to have in his cabinet, son of a bitch, turned out to go in his cabinet. So it was no surprise to people who knew this information that Barack Obama actually was doing legislation to make the fat cats fatter and screw over people. And this is what you're screaming about here. Okay, here we go.
Dealing with this until 2017. I'm not here to talk about plans to deal with this till 2017. I'm saying we've got a real problem, and I'm tired of Republicans and Democrats who either want Republicans who want to burn the place to the ground, and Democrats, with all due respect, who want to offer a plan that gets it through their end of their second term of their presidency, and then screws me and my kids when it's over. And until we do that, we have to deal with the extraction that is at foot. It is the reason the financial markets are behaving the way they're behaving. That is a mathematical fact. This is not some opinion. This is a mathematical fact. Tens of trillions of dollars are being extracted from the United States of America. Democrats aren't doing it. Republicans are not doing it. An entire integrated system, financial system, trading system, taxing system that was created by both parties over a period of 2 decades is at work on our entire country right now. And we're sitting here arguing about whether we should do the $4 trillion plan that kicks the can down the road for the president for 2017 or burn the place to the ground, both of which are reckless, irresponsible, and stupid. And the fact of the matter is, until we actually, and I'm sorry to lose my temper, but I tell you.
What I like is a guy who apologizes for losing his temper and then actually ratchets it up one more notch. Watch this.
I've been coming on TV for 3 years doing this. And the fact of the matter is that there's a refusal on both the Democratic and the Republican side of the aisle to acknowledge the mathematical problem, which is that the United States of America is being extracted. It's being extracted through banking, it's being extracted through trade, and it's being extracted through taxation. And there's not a single politician that has stepped forward, Susan, to deal with this.
Okay, so explain what you mean there. What led to you to have that rant? So now
I was in the middle of writing the book, so I was in the middle of writing Greedy Bastards, which was forcing me to swim around in the really, really granular detail of each of the with the way I structured that book was so there's a chapter on trade policy, chapter on banking policy, chapter on healthcare, and so sort of in the granularity of each of those things, and the more further down I got into each thing, the more transparent it was to see the flow of money away from society and away from the services that are necessary and into the consolidation of the sort of super class, the global elite that is non-national. There is no country for the super rich. Their country is airplanes and airports and luxury hotels, and you move from country to country.
So when you say, I just want to, so people can understand, you're saying I was starting to investigate how it works, banking, corporate, and money was being drawn away from the people to the. So when you say that, you mean so it's being extracted, meaning banks
either in a linear, usually
so banks, what banks normally do is lend money to people who want to build something, and they create value. But that's not what was happening. What they were doing was doing these financial instruments that was actually not building anything, but just creating wealth that they would then extract from the system. Is that what you mean?
I mean, yes, but I can be more precise.
Go ahead.
What the banking system was changed to do in the Clinton era and then enhanced in the Bush era is very simple, which is, instead of doing what you just described, lending and investing in the creation of value, period, the entire system became one where the most profitable thing you could do is sell insurance on debt. And when the most profitable thing you can do is to sell insurance on debt, the only limit to your business is the amount of debt you can issue. So remember when cars were 0% for a long time?
Yes.
Why was that? Because I needed more car debt to sell insurance on. So if we're running an insurance, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so now I have this incentive to create as much debt as possible, housing debt, mortgages, ninja loans, that whole nonsense. And then the 0% on the cars, because the more debt I can create, the more bond insurance I can sell on that debt.
Is that a credit default swap?
That's what that is. Yeah. Very good, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yeah, impressive. And then when that insurance is sold really cheaply, it creates that much more, and sort of everybody's reinforcing, right? So the car loan or the house loan is getting cheap insurance from the big credit markets, which means I can create as many house loans and car loans as possible. Everybody's buying the insurance because having the insurance means that I'm no longer going to have the risk of a default on those loans at the banking level. And the beautiful thing is when the defaults come in, when people can't pay those mortgages or don't pay the car payment or don't do whatever, they don't have to pay the claims. So all the premiums that were collected in the insurance sales are profit, and the liabilities are paid out through the Federal Reserve and the U.S. taxpayer. But the premium is collected there. So the consequence of that, and the reason it becomes an extraction, is because now the price of everything is wrong. Because there's so much debt that's driving housing pricing up, and that is pressing opportunity and available capital away from all the human beings and funneling it ultimately up into a few folks. That's one example of sort of a nonlinear extraction. I mean, there are very linear extractions that are more around loopholes in the tax code and things like this. I mean, there's layers of how this is done.
So the extraction part happens at one level because the way Bill Clinton, when he got rid of Glass-Steagall.
Actually, the commodity. This is different.
This is different.
Component. This is the repeal of Glass-Steagall is a
Commodity
component.
and Future.
Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which you're probably familiar with, considering your
George Bush
attention
did that
to it.
one.
But again, when you look at the combination of all of those, so here's the biggie. One, and let's just back up, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Who's they?
Larry Summers,
okay.
Bob Rubin,
right.
Bill Clinton, the party boys from the 90s that uncorked this whole firestorm of hell upon the earth. The idea, though, it's the era of the internet, early internet, shall we say, and they're like, we can use computers, now that there's sort of this infinite computing power, to take all of the trapped capital of the world, all the buildings, all the insurance policies, life insurance policies, this sort of thing, all the bank deposits. And we can use all the trapped capital of the world and using our ability to calculate forward default rates.
Now, you call it trapped capital, meaning that it's not liquid.
Yeah, like it's just in the house.
So we have something of value, but it's not liquid. But now we're going to figure out a way to make it liquid.
We're going to let that building exist, let that insurance policy exist, but I'm going to use computers to run a calculation on, so let's say I've got $1 billion building.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have $1 billion that I can put into the lending markets to make money with.
Right.
But if I use the $1 billion of that building as collateral for credit default swaps that I can then issue out, now I'm creating for society a benefit because all of a sudden the consumer market has all this additional cash to drive consumption because Larry Summers, who at the time was the architect, believes that consumption is the number one most important thing a human being can do in this world.
Is consume.
Consume anything, right? And not produce anything, not create anything, not do anything, but just to become a consumer. That's the number one thing. And so that building then becomes a source of capital, credit, right, that can be issued for consumption by using the internet. One of the keys was Glass-Steagall, which allows that building or those bank deposits, in the case of Glass-Steagall, not a building, but bank deposits, to be used for risk capital against lending and speculation. But also, I needed to pass a law that says that the credit default swap, which is definitively and clearly and explicitly an insurance policy, is not insurance. And so exempting the credit default swap, which is one of Larry Summers' biggies, is critical moving forward because
exempting it from what?
That it's not insurance.
That from insurance regulation?
If something is insurance, each state has an insurance regulator that has capital requirements. If you want to sell car insurance, you want to sell health insurance. Right. Like there are rules. So I can't just go around I can't sell fire insurance in California, but have no money and I'm just be like, just start sending money.
Right.
But
So when he got rid of them, considering credit default,
when the credit default swap was moved outside of the regulatory theater of insurance, where now it was like, no, these are sophisticated actors. This is an interbank market. We're not selling credit default swaps to Dylan and Jimmy. We're selling it to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. It exists. That's the only place that market exists. These are sophisticated players. If Goldman Sachs is willing to buy it and Morgan Stanley is willing to sell it, they're smarter than the rest of us. They'll figure out what the collateral should be. Why should we leave it to a bureaucrat in Albany or Sacramento or and so that was a key moment to facilitate that entire undertaking. And once the credit default swap exists, now you have this wave of consumption, because now you have all the consumer, you have all the cheap credit cards, all the cheap car loans, all the cheap housing loans. Just that you have this wave of money flying out, and you have people like Jack Welch at General Electric at the time who are then manipulate, because remember General Electric has all these fixed assets. So who better to sell credit default swaps than General Electric?
And so that's why they got.
And so how does General Electric each quarter make its number?
Selling more.
Dial up. You get about a week away. You know you want to beat by 2 cents. Open up the risk curve, dial it up a little bit, spin some out. Really? And then what really the chicken that came home to roost, obviously in 2008-9, and so the whole premise of this is we're so good at calculating the probable forward default rate over a curve, right? What percentage? 5% will default, 10% will default, whatever it is. We're so good at that we can now leverage every dollar at 100 to 1.
So when you say leverage, you mean we can
for every dollar the bank has, I can lend 100.
That's right. Okay.
And the only reason I can allow such a high level of lending against such a small amount of cash is because I'm so good at knowing who's going to pay it back.
But they weren't.
No, they weren't.
But they were.
And not only that, not only am I so good at figuring out who's going to pay it back, I also have insurance on it because I bought swaps on it.
Right. So.
But then when it got to AIG, who had sold all the swaps,
they couldn't cover
the government paid AIG 100 cents on the dollar, which then pushed through the entire system. Everybody got paid. Anyway, it's the biggest theft and cover-up in history. It's still not understood, really, to this day.
And so that's what drives me crazy when people give speeches and running for president or on television and act like Trump is the most corrupt thing that we've ever seen in this country. They say it. He's the most corrupt. I'm like, first of all, he's only been president for a few years. He hasn't had the opportunity to do the shit that Barack Obama did.
The sophistication of the theft and the largest theft and cover-up in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a small-time mobster. He's a street corner mobster.
Compared to those guys.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to guys like Larry Summers.
Rubin, all those guys.
And Obama, ultimately.
Of course. No, Obama was the finisher. Because then if you indicted Barack Obama's solution, you're a racist.
Yeah, so doesn't that make you crazy? Because it makes me crazy. I consume the political television, like the debates, and it just turned into a who can dunk harder on Trump contest. And even when Bernie Sanders gets up there and says he's the most corrupt president, it's like, why are you saying that? He's not, obviously not. George Bush was way more corrupt than he was, manifestly. I mean, it's just transparently, he hasn't.
But even comparative corruption, the hyperbole around who's the most corrupt is a waste of our lives.
It's just a waste of our life. You're right. And by the way, but that's what they spend all their time on. Yeah. And that's what the mission of this show is, to remind people, you get rid of Trump, the conditions that caused Trump are still present. As Chris Hedges says, Trump is what gets vomited up from a failed democracy.
Yes.
So right now, what is happening all over across the country, which I saw as a stand-up comedian touring the country for the last 25 years, is that capitalism is hollowing out cities from coast to coast, right?
Sure.
And the first thing they do is build a bigger prison.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I mean, whether you're in Rockville, Illinois, or Anderson, Indiana, wherever it goes, that's what they do.
People own Corrections Corporation of America and their 401k.
Yes. It's amazing. So, and now what corporations are doing is actually buying up the infrastructure that supports capitalism and bankrupting it. Mm-hmm. So what Marx predicted is that capitalism will eat itself. It's literally happening right now.
Look at the streets of the world.
Yes.
I mean, granted, not so much in America at this moment, but people are. People get it.
So now, people like me who have looked at this a little closer,
sure,
than most people.
I would say a lot closer, but
not a lot closer than people like you, but
a lot closer than most humans.
Than most human beings. I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the problem actually is capitalism. And that, why do we let capitalists yank the rug out from beneath an entire community because they can make another nickel producing whatever they can produce in another country where people are more desperate? And that's exactly the system we have, right? So that's what happens in towns like Andersonville or in Rockford. It happens everywhere where a capitalist just decides I can make, or GM is doing it right now. So we bail out GM, and then GM says, I can make another nickel by making this in Mexico. Fuck everybody here in Ohio. We're going, or Michigan, and that's that. Even though we bailed them out. And what Chomsky makes the point is that, when we bailed out GM, we could have told them, why did we give it back to the same people who just failed? Why didn't we say, hey, you know what? This is going to be a worker-owned thing now. And if you want to do something, the worker, just like they do in Spain for 100 years, that kind of worker owns the means of production actually works. So this idea that it doesn't work.
I would disagree with you insofar as, so there's, the word capitalism in and of itself is a problem, because capitalism, as I perceive it to be right now, is really just seen as get as much money as you can any way you can at all costs with no morals or no anything, right? Like that's how I feel like that's sort of how the current absorption of what is capitalism. But capitalism really is intended, I'm not saying functionally that that's incorrect, by the way. I think
in theory, on paper, it's...
On paper, capital is a resource. Your time is a resource. It's not just money. The community is capital. Your time is capital. The money is capital. And the question is, well, how do people organize their capital, not just their money, but all their time and creativity, et cetera, to create value for other people in the community? And the argument is, well, the people in the community are better suited to do that than the central government, right? So that's where the propaganda in favor of capitalism is born, is out of that non-existent universe in which capital is perceived to be something that's more than just get as much money as possible, and then let the communities decide how to manage that. And so I have an issue with the word capitalism because, sure, does anybody want a system where basically a few people take everything and nobody else has anything?
Which is what we have now.
Which is what we have now. But that's also what communism is. That's all. In other words, because here's the thing. Those are all just words. The real issue is concentration of wealth and power in control of the means of production and the government. But whether that is, the reason I have the biggest objection to someone like Bernie Sanders is not saying we should put more opportunity and more decision-making into Pasadena or into parts of Texas, or give me all the power and I'll figure it out. And then you're like, oh, well, because Bernie Sanders is my kind of guy and I like Bernie Sanders' values, I'll be happy to give Bernie Sanders all the switches to all the systems and he'll figure it out. Or I don't like Bernie Sanders, but I'd rather see Donald Trump have all the power, et cetera. So I actually believe that the real battle of our time, and Matt Stoller just wrote a book about this. I don't know, are you familiar with Matt at all?
Yes.
So he did this book, Goliath, which I think he did, which is really about the return of the monopoly. So the end game of capitalism, the end game of the desire to get money at all costs, the easiest way to get money at all costs is to be the single provider. If I'm the only person who sells gasoline, you're going to buy my gasoline, as long as you drive a car. And so we've now sort of advanced to the point where we have all these monopolies, with Facebook and Google being the sort of poster children for the tech monopolies, and down the line. And that that's why you need to use antitrust law. So anyway, I would say that the issue is concentrated power more than it is capitalism, although capitalism is... because capitalism is such a loaded word. When I say your capitalism is not the same as my capitalism, and your communism is the same as mine.
So when I say capitalism is the problem, I don't mean
rapacious theft.
Yeah, I don't mean buying and selling or markets are a problem, because even where you have worker-owned means of production, they still sell what they make,
and there's still markets.
Yeah, and there's still
make markets.
Yes, it's just the decision making is done by the people who actually are affected by the economy instead of one person.
Sure.
So
I just don't trust any. I guess what I would say is, if you're going to go magic wand, the number one thing is the incentive for the money, and the number one thing that dictates the incentive for the money is the tax code. And so, if I have a situation where the tax code rewards long-term investment in the creation of jobs in America, or I have a situation where the tax code rewards the elimination of jobs and the concentration of wealth offshore, I can swap people all day.
Right.
But whoever I put in that chair is ultimately going to, it's the Truth and Reconciliation, the South African model,
So
right? Where the system creates the villain. The villains are a function of the system, which the system produces villains because that's.
So we should have had one of those after the.
Exactly.
And we didn't have one.
And I mean, that was why it's so funny that you say that. I was like, because I was so intimate in the 90s through the Bloomberg work to the creation of the system that ultimately blew up in 2008 and 9. And through all those, I worked at CNBC all those years. I was willing to accept. I was like, okay, listen, you had this idea with the internet and computers to digitize and unleash trapped capital and all the things. Let me give you the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't a nefarious intent. You thought it would create more money for more people to create more things. But your experiment just blew up atrociously in 2008. I'll give you that. But then you've got to say, okay, we just ran this experiment with these things and it was an unadulterated disaster. So now we need to re-rack and try a new angle on this that's not that. And instead of doing that, it was no problem, nothing to see here. Let's take care of healthcare, distraction. And then, by the way we're going to take care of healthcare is going to empower the employer-based private health insurance monopolies. Do you understand the amount of frustration and rage that I experienced in that particular moment? Because we're going through the financial crisis. And it was there to be solved. It was all right in front of us.
And Barack Obama could have fixed it.
Barack Obama rolls straight up with the full control of the House. And they're like, the whole bank thing's been solved. We're going to take care of healthcare. So then I was like, okay. Who am I to set the priorities for a nation? They believe healthcare is more important than whatever's going on with the financial system. Who am I to judge? So let's see what you do with the healthcare system. And then they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to maintain the employer-based private health insurance monopolies, but we're just going to force everybody to buy it. And then we're going to claim we increase coverage.
Yeah, that's
It's
exactly
enough to make you have an emotional experience.
It's exactly what Mitt Romney would have did.
Yeah.
In fact, that Barack Obama's plan was thought up by guys like Mitt Romney at the Heritage Foundation when Bill Clinton actually threatened universal health care. So their response was to come up with Obamacare. And then when Obama got elected, he's like, I'm just going to do Obamacare.
And then you run a mandate to purchase insurance from an unreformed monopoly, which then sets up the opportunity for the Republicans and Trump to come in and say, this is crazy. You can't force me to buy something, which is true, by the way. That's a valid point, but it's a total distraction from the issue, which is your entire health insurance system is run by a private monopoly. And instead of dealing with the private monopoly health insurance system,